Welcome to Zero. I'm Akshat Rathi. This week, we are off to the races.
Akshat, where are we today? This is a different podcast to usual.
It is different. We are still in London, but we are inside an exhibition hall which has been turned into a race track for an electric car race, a Formula E. You've heard about Formula 1, right? But do you know about Formula E, its plucky all-electric sibling? Earlier this year, I went to watch the Formula E race here in London with Zero's producer, Oscar Boyd.
Where are we in the kind of grand complex of the exhibition centre?
We are in the pit lane looking at essentially broken apart cars right now that are being readied for a race that's about to start in a couple of hours.
And these are all electric cars?
These are all electric cars. It was the last race of a very busy season. We had been invited by Envision Racing, one of 11 teams, each with 2 cars competing in Formula E. And as part of the tour, I got to go see the pit lane before the race started, and later even walk alongside the cars parked on the starting line. I also spoke to one of Envision Racing's drivers, Sebastian Buemi.
It's the top electric racing series you can have in the world. The cars are getting faster and faster. It's actually really nice to be a driver in this championship. It's very hard, but it's great.
Formula E has been around for just over a decade, and the cars have come a long way in that time. When the first race took place in 2014, each driver needed 2 cars per race because the batteries just wouldn't last the full course. Now each driver uses just 1 car, which can accelerate faster than a Formula 1 car and hit top speeds of around 320 kilometers per hour, tearing around corners with a high-pitched whistle from the electric motors. I was very excited to see it.
So this afternoon, we're about to see your first ever car race.
This is my first ever car race. I mean, I've watched it on TV, and this is way more exciting. There feels to be a lot more mood here with people watching, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And does it feel strangely fitting that your first ever car race is, as a climate journalist, is with electronic cars?
I think I would not be going to a car race if it wasn't electric. This week on Zero, I'm talking with Sylvain Filippi, co-founder, managing director, and chief technology officer of Envision Racing. I asked him why the world needs an electric racing series, how Formula E is improving the experience for consumer electric cars, and why he's not concerned about the US backlash against EVs. Sylvain, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Now, you started your career working for car companies, well-known car companies, but then you got into racing. What drew you into racing, and particularly electric vehicle racing?
Yeah, it's a really long story, so I will keep it short. But for me, in short, it was the realization in my consulting years of how powerful and how ultimately inevitable this technology was. An electric motor is so much better suited at moving a vehicle than an IC engine ultimately. So there was a sense of inevitability that electric cars will be everywhere simply because of their sheer efficiency and how much better they are as a technology. And one evening in a pub in London many years ago, we had this crazy idea of starting the first EV racing series.
And that was what year?
So that was 2009 was when we had this project of launching EV Cup, which was the kind of the baby project before Formula E. And ultimately, Formula E started in 2013 when we started the company.
And so the EV Cup itself, can you talk through what it is that you wanted electric vehicle racing to be that would be different from what is currently all forms of racing, from Formula 1 to Le Mans to like other types of endurance racing? What did you want electric car racing to look like?
The original idea was pretty simple, was to say, look, we could see that there was this tsunami of electric cars that was going to come to market. Remember in 2009 and 10, there were very few electric cars on the road. You had the Nissan Leaf that was coming. That was the first one. That was before the Tesla Model S, and so it was the beginning. But doing all this project with car manufacturers, I knew that it was all coming. And I could see the amount of R&D being spent, and it was clearly happening. So really the original idea was very simple, was to say, look, we have dozens and dozens of championships on IC engine. There was for sure going to be a need and a desire for at least one championship developing EV technology. And so for me, it was not a matter of whether it's going to happen or not. It was a question of when, really. So for me, it was really fun to create my own startup and start working on EV racing because it was the very first project. So we had so much PR and coverage in all the magazines you can think of, basis of that simple idea, because it was just so exciting to everybody. And then long story short, as we started to get everything ready in the cars and so on, then the FIA came up with the tender or the call for expression of interest to run Formula E, which was the same thing on a bigger scale. Interestingly, not many people know, the EU Commission at the time was setting the very first automotive targets in terms of low emissions and electric cars. And I believe the European Commission made a call to the FIA to say, out of all your championships, you ought to have one that's promoting electric cars. And anyway, as always in life, it's all about timing. And then 2012 was when the project kind of started on paper. And then a year later, 2013, we entered the team.
So Formula E has been now going on for 11 years. There have been 11 seasons. The most recent season just concluded. Things have changed in that time, both for electric cars and for Formula E itself. In the initial race, you actually had two cars for the same driver, and you had to come and swap midway because the batteries wouldn't last. Now that's changed because there's a single car. Can you just talk through the evolution of what the race looked like when it started and how has it evolved to now?
Yes, it is one of the funny stories looking back, really, because when we started, to summarize before going to the details, you have to remember what the objectives of Formula E are. And the main two pillars are really simple. The first pillar, Formula E's purpose and goal in life is to be a technology innovation play, really. It's about putting a problem, which is mostly battery energy density and powertrain efficiency, and through racing, through putting the best engineering minds, improve or accelerate the rate of innovation that would have normally happened in kind of the normal world. The second pillar, of course, is the media platform, the broadcast, the promotion. Sport is very effective to connect with people and a large number of people. So if you can put together really exciting technology innovation and an exciting sport, you have something very powerful. So to your point, when we started in 2013 and first race in 2014, and still the case today, we are limited by technology. We are creating the best possible technology, whether it's batteries, motors, inverters, all the things we are creating, simply because we are limited by the art of the possible. We are developing every 2 years high voltage systems and software and so on that didn't exist before. So in 2014 and 15 at the beginning, the best technology available would only allow us to run for 20 minutes with one car. So to do a 40-minute race, it was a very peculiar situation where we had two drivers in the team, but we needed two cars per driver. And each driver would go on in car A, do half the race, come back in the garage, jump out literally out of the first car, jump in the second car and go again. And all the media and journalists at the time were telling me, Sylvain, what are you doing? If anything, you're highlighting the problems of electric cars. Like, what are you doing? And the answer was always the same. And the answer was, look, do not judge us on where we are today. This is the starting point. We want to be judged on how quickly we are improving that technology. So anyway, long story short, 4 years later, we managed to do the same race distance at a higher power with only one car. So clearly a massive jump in energy storage, energy density, and efficiency. And then to Gen 3, 4 years after that, we managed to again increase the power from 200 kilowatt to 350 kilowatts. So a massive jump in power. Again, reducing the weight of the car, increasing the efficiency. So really improving every single metric, which resulted in a much faster car. And today, without going through all the evolutions, we are now in the Gen 3 Evo, so the second phase of Gen 3. And we have a car that can accelerate from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 1.8 seconds and has amazing performance characteristics. If you look back at tell people to go on YouTube and look back at the races in season 1 and compare to the car today, it's absolutely unbelievable, the performance improvement in 10 years. And the whole point is racing gives a visual representation of the improvement of the technology. And hopefully people now watch Formula E and are just really amazed by how fast and exciting this car is.
So the acceleration itself is now faster than a Formula One car, but the top speed still is a little bit lower. So a Formula E car can go up to 200 miles per hour, whereas a Formula One car can go up to 230 or so. Now, one way of thinking about motorsport is that people just want to see fast cars. And of course, Formula One has a bigger base. And, I've never been to a Formula One race ever, but people tell me like it's a visceral experience because you're hearing these engines that are very loud and you can feel it as the cars drive past. Watching the Formula E race in London, I thought that was loud, given electric cars are typically much quieter than the Formula E electric cars. But I've been assured that was not loud. The fact that I could sit there without wearing earplugs was indoors, especially because the London track is indoors. But if it's about people who just want to see fast cars, why would people want to watch Formula E versus Formula One, where the fastest cars are today?
It's an evolution. It takes time. Formula One has been around for 70 years, has the most incredible heritage and legacy and glamour around it. Completely well-deserved because it's been an amazing sport for so many years. Formula E, in a way, we are still a startup, right? We are only 11 years old. But what I really like and what the FIA has done a good job is to really position the two championships in a really different way. We are not competing. If anything, there's cross-pollination between the two championships. So people are watching Formula E and pretty much all the Formula E races are sold out and the growth is pretty much 20% year on year, again, since COVID. So there's a strong appetite because people are realizing it's something new and different. It's not one or the other. It is just very different. You can come to a Formula E race and bring your young kids and your family, and it's in general terms more approachable and more family friendly, and that's a great thing. But Formula One is also a fantastic experience that is different. But it's funny you said that about the noise because again I heard that a lot when people say, "Oh, electric racing, it's going to be very boring because there's no noise." But first you realize when the 22 cars arrive at speeds, you have to remember at speeds of 100 miles an hour, most of the noise you hear is aero noise anyway, which we have exactly the same. So you hear the Formula E pack arriving before you can see it, which people didn't realize with electric cars, but it's still the case. So you still get that emotion. And ultimately, it's just a different experience. And, we have the Gen 4 car coming end of next year, which we are developing. And that car will have absolutely unbelievable performance, getting very close to Formula One. And seeing a car going that fast at more than 300 kph, making relatively low noise, will be something unbelievable to watch. So it's just different, and I think the two complement each other.
Let's look at the technology pillar of the two pillars in Formula E. We talked about how people might perceive and how the growth of the sport might happen as a result, but the technology is what drives you. You're the chief technology officer for Envision Racing. What is the relationship between a racing team and the manufacturer? Because, your current car is made by Jaguar. A few years ago, it was made by Audi. How does that work? And what kind of innovation does that result in?
Again, Formula E in that sense is no different to pretty much all the other series, including F1. You typically have teams, competitors. And what is really good in Formula E is that we have a rich variety of teams. You have teams that are full factory teams, so owned by the car manufacturer, which makes complete sense and is absolutely needed because these manufacturers develop part of the hardware of the car and ultimately do a lot of the promotion around road cars, right? So it's a really important factor. Then you tend to have another category, which is racing teams that go racing as their core business. So kind of racing empires that race in different series, categories, and so on. And Formula E is part of their portfolio. And then you have a third category, which we happen to be the only one in, which is we're a racing team that was completely built and is completely dedicated to Formula E because we are overall a green tech company at Envision. We only work on renewable energy solutions, and therefore only really Formula E makes sense for us as a motorsport. And it's part of the ecosystem. You have teams and competitors which are needed. This is the core layer of the championship. And then you have manufacturers who develop the hardware part of it, which is the really interesting part of the hardware innovation. And then the teams, of course, once you have that, there is still a huge amount of work that is done by the teams, which is the strategy, the software, the energy management, all the operational aspects of running a race team.
And so are there technologies that have resulted from either your work or other teams' work that now exist in commercial cars.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the bit that gets really interesting. So stop me if it's a bit too geeky, but it gets really interesting if you put it in perspective, right? So why do we believe that EV mobility is the way forward? That's the starting point. The reason is very simple. It's efficiency. There's no other technology today that comes nowhere near in terms of efficiency. And efficiency matters because it's all about the energy you spend per mile travel. So to put some numbers and to put that into context, if you drive today an IC engine, petrol, diesel, whatever car on the road, typically that engine will be around 25% efficient. But that's actually when the engine is warm and you're on the motorway. If you do a short school run in winter when the engine is cold, it can be less than that. So it's really pretty horrible if you think about it. You put 10 liters of fuel in your car and maybe 1 to 2 actually makes it to the wheel. The rest is wasted in friction and heat. That doesn't make us feel very good. The reason why IC engine cars have such good range despite having such a poor efficiency is because fossil fuel is the most amazing thing. There is so much energy stored in a liter of fossil fuel, and it's why we are so addicted to it. A good electric road car, it's varying a lot, and it goes up, but let's say 80-85%. It's a pretty good position, and it will improve. If you put 10 kilowatt hour of energy in that battery, 80-85% of that goes to the wheel. A lot better, very efficient. Our racing cars, and I'm not making an unfair racing to road analogy. It's genuinely comparing apples and apples. If you compare the efficiency from the output of the battery all the way to the wheel, so battery, inverter, motor, gearbox, diff, drive shaft, wheel, our efficiency is 96%. And that is pretty mind-blowing, right? So like from storing the energy to the wheel, we are only wasting a few percent of energy. And that's what makes electric mobility a no-brainer, because then if you take an extreme scenario, if you took a country, I don't know, make it up, Germany, if overnight all the cars in Germany were electric, the country as a whole would need 3 to 4 times less energy for road transport, which is a complete game changer.
Yeah.
And if you need 3 or 4 times less energy overall, then it's a lot easier to get that energy from renewable sources.
Yeah.
Because you need 4 times less.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty interesting to see how much of the car's race is run on energy that is recovered from regenerative braking throughout the race. So 40-45%, right? Which is crazy. Like almost half the race is run by basically the energy gained back from braking. What of those technologies have ended up in a commercial vehicle?
Yeah. So I get to that. So exactly to your point, the two together, super high efficiency of the powertrain and the fact that we typically use around just under 40 kilowatt hour in the pack when we start the race. So we can do
that's about like a mid-size electric car on the road today.
Exactly. Actually, on
or
the small
a half
side,
size for like a Tesla 80 kilowatt hour battery.
To put it in perspective for people to understand, in terms of energy stored, it is the equivalent of about 4 liters of fuel. That's the same amount of energy. So you can do a race at these speeds for close to an hour on 4 liters of fuel. That's another way to show that efficiency, right? So this is why it's so important. In terms of trickle down to road car, it's really easy. In Formula E, there is no misalignment between the technical roadmap of Formula E and what is needed for road cars. Historically, in a lot of cases in racing, any technology that makes a race car go faster, you typically want the opposite for a road car. In Formula E, focusing entirely on the efficiency of these powertrains, which is the only thing we work on really, as well as the energy density of batteries. If you can gain, the 85 to 96% I talked about, these 10-15% of efficiency gain, they will directly translate to road cars. And what that means is, you can look at it 2 ways. Either for the same size of battery, cars will have 15% more range, or better still, which is the way it's going, we are now pretty, in a situation where 350 mile range is pretty much accepted as, we don't really need that much more. But if you can have a car that is 15% more efficient, we can now reduce the size of the battery by 15%, which makes the car lighter, therefore even more efficient. So you get into this virtuous cycle and more affordable as well.
After the break, I asked Sylvain Filippi whether Formula E can ever hope to challenge Formula One's crown as the world's top racing sport. And hey, if you're enjoying this episode, please give Zero a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Recently, Natasha Arras wrote that Zero is a great podcast on the challenges of our time and the need for planetary measures to be taken. Thank you, Natasha.
So we're about 10 laps into your first ever race, and we sat right by the main straight. How fast are the cars? And here they come.
Oh, you can hear them. They are going fast.
The smell is all just tires.
It's all the tires burning. And the smoke is also all the tires burning.
On this show, we've talked about electric cars a bunch of times. We have numbers from Tesla, for example, where the motor efficiency, not just the entire powertrain, but motor efficiency itself has improved 10% over the past 15 years.
Yep.
Which you can't say of like an internal combustion engine, which you're getting very small percentage improvements every year. But, that's Tesla.
Yep.
The other giant in electric cars is BYD.
Yeah.
Neither Tesla nor BYD participate in Formula E.
Yeah.
So first, why is that? And then second, what of the Formula E innovation has ended up in commercial cars? Because if Tesla and BYD are driving that innovation without being involved in the Formula E ecosystem.
Yeah. So I'll give you a clear example. So first, why Tesla and BYD are not in the sports? I don't know exactly. I know we were speaking to Tesla at the very beginning. The reality for Tesla at the beginning was simply that they were too busy doing what they were doing. Their challenge at the time was manufacturing ramp up and scalability, and frankly, that was completely fair. That's what they needed. BYD, I don't know, but I know many OEMs are still looking at Formula E, so you never know in the future. In terms of innovation, so basically you have to break down how do we achieve that efficiency? The first one is really high voltage. So again, without getting too technical, power, which is what moves your car, is a function of voltage times current times amp. So if you double the voltage, you need half the current to achieve the same power. And the losses are typically not in the voltage, but in the current. So we started formally. So typically all the electric road cars up to a few years ago were based on a 350, 400 volt architecture, all of them, including Tesla. We started racing in Formula E at 700 volts, and we are now racing at 950 volts. What that means is, first, we had to create an entire supply chain of components. You could not find on the market an inverter, an electric motor, or any components that were suited to Formula E, that were very high power density, very light, very high voltage, developing 300 kilowatts. There was no application for it. It didn't exist. So we developed collectively as an ecosystem, inverters, motors, highly specialist, super high performance motors, inverters at this high voltage. And ultimately, we validated over many years of racing that these really high voltage components are reliable, efficient, and we basically proved the technology on track, which is back to my point from the beginning, is what Formula E is all about. So from that exercise, we basically indirectly, because the industry works together, created that new standard, which is now 800 volts. So the latest premium electric road cars are based on an 800 volt architecture, and it's trickling down to Hyundai, Kia, I believe, and many others. And this is a big deal, because you can see mid-range affordable electric car today will have a range approximating 300 miles when it was 150 not that long ago. A lot of that is coming from high voltage and overall powertrain efficiencies, which is exactly what we're doing in Formula E. In the IC engine days, we used to compare to Formula One. The typical time was about 10-15 years from when an innovation was in Formula One to the way it would come to road cars. In our world, in the electric car world, we see that being reduced to 2 to 5 years. And then the second part is software. That's the big difference in electric cars. Software allows you to refine how you use the energy within your powertrain, and you can find gains. I remember Jaguar a few years ago explained that in their I-Pace at the time, they managed to increase the range by about 25 miles without changing a single hardware component. They just learned about battery duty cycle, battery longevity, and simply the relationship between the battery, the inverter, and the motor, and using that better. And that's what we do in Formula E every race. Every race, we optimize the powertrain that we have. So you look at our car at the end of the season, that car is faster than at the beginning of the season, even though it's the exact same car. But through software, we are refining how we use the energy. And that is really only possible in the electric car world.
I mean, I've been writing about electric cars since 2017. And every year, me and my dad talk about when is it a good time for him to buy an electric car. And he has very clear limitations. He's like, I'm only going to buy a car that I can afford and it can do these things. And finally, this year, actually, like this month, he's bought an electric car. It's a 400 volt architecture, but it's affordable now.
Yes.
And, it has a 350 kilometers range, which is plenty for him to be able to do his city things.
Yep.
So it certainly is the case that, all these innovations trickle down.
Yep.
But if we go back to Formula E, do you think one reason to create this race is that perhaps one day, people will find these gas-guzzling, ear-splitting engines kind of boring, and that Formula E will be ready to become the successor to Formula One?
Yeah, I don't know if boring is the word, but for sure, what I anticipate and what we are planning for sure, is that Formula E is growing at very rapid pace, right? Like, to look at numbers, we have today, last year, 490 million cumulative audience. So it's an accepted way of measuring a sport. You basically take the audience of each race and you add them up. And the target is to get to 800 million by 2030. And to have 500 million fans. So when we achieve these numbers, Formula E will be by far the second largest motorsport, just after F1. Reaching these numbers will basically mean that our impact is pretty massive, because you are showing this technology to a huge amount of people. So ultimately, to your point, what we're trying to do is accelerate mass adoption of electric cars. But I've said for the last 12 years, if we really want mass market adoption and a really complete system change, we will never get there through subsidies and incentives and so on. We just have to deliver a product that is better. And the only way we deliver a product that is better is through energy density and efficiency. And exactly to your point, and there are many stories like this, get to a point where, you know what, I'm going to buy a car, and already today, over 5 years, in most cases, having an electric car is cheaper. But very soon we will get to a point where we will get cost parity at purchase, and in over 5 years, it's a lot cheaper. But really, we are working hard. So when you have such high efficiency and high energy density batteries and so on, you're buying an electric car that is quicker, faster, more fun to drive, nicer to drive in traffic jam, costs you far less to run because it's so efficient, and is basically better in every single way. And only when we deliver that, then you can anticipate mass adoption of electric cars. And again, why are we doing this? Back to my very first point. This really matters hugely, because if you look at climate change in general, transport is roughly 30% of the problem, right? And even though, moving a country entirely to electric seems like a daunting task, it's actually the easiest in terms of climate change. It's an awful lot easier than decarbonizing air travel, freight, steel manufacturing, and all these things that are a lot more difficult. So it really matters that we accelerate transition to EVs as fast as possible, because it's a low-hanging fruit in a way. Even though it sounds difficult, it's really important. And let's not forget the massive health benefits. We don't talk enough about this. We are living in a system currently that doesn't really make sense, where 80% of people live in mega cities, and yet we put all the pollution where people live. It is absolutely critical to have zero tailpipe emission where people live. It's billions of pounds, euros, dollars saving for the healthcare industry, and it's just a better way to live. So this is a critical part of it.
What do we think of attack mode?
I thought it was really fun. I know it's a gimmick, but actually it changes the game dynamics so much. We are like 2/3 of the race.
One of the things I enjoyed the most about the race in London is attack mode. So you have this ability for an electric car, which for the race has a 300 kilowatt motor, but for a few minutes can switch into this attack mode and have 350 kilowatts. So it's sort of like the motor unlocks more power. And I am told Mario Kart was the inspiration for this, that you get that extra boost. And then you can do funky things with it, which is have drivers who were 19 get onto pole position in a race. Why was gimmick like that necessary for you to make Formula E interesting?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's back to my earlier point really about striking that balance between technology development, but also make the sport entertaining. So again, we are blessed in Formula E that, the racing itself is bonkers enough that it's fun as it is. But attack mode was just a genius idea really, because it showcased not only what you can do with electric cars, but also it makes the races so entertaining. So really the principle is quite simple, and it is kind of derived from a principle from Mario Kart, where you basically have some sensors on the track at a particular corner. And if you go across the 3 sensors, then you press a button on the steering wheel and you get an extra 50 kilowatt from the front axle. So you get a lot of performance. And it basically mixes up the game. And it's the same for everybody. So it gives kind of a strategic element to the race, where what we did yesterday is not so easy to go from the back to all the way to the podium. You need a lot of stars to align. But through energy management, which is really critical, how and when you spend the energy that you have through the race, and the use of attack mode, if you use it at the perfect time with the perfect energy management strategy, you can make a lot of places. So it's a really kind of interesting strategic part of the sport, but also it's just super entertaining.
So if we hit both of those pillars that Formula E was created, which is the technology pillar and sort of engaging the audience pillar, if the technology pillar gives you affordable electric cars that everybody can buy, that is enabled partly because of the technology improvements in Formula E, and people find the sport interesting, Formula One now exists in a world where it's not trying to sell you the internal combustion engine car. It's just selling you a sport that people are interested in watching. Do you think that's what Formula E becomes? It's not about the electric car technology in the way that it's trying to sell an electric car. It might be interesting as a technology play, but it's really a sport that people are interested in watching the race, watching what the drivers do, watching the phenomena.
I think that's really far away. So the beauty of Formula E, it's also a massive challenge, but a challenge we like, is that, as I said at the beginning, every 2 years we are just pushing the technology forward. We are running a technology that did not exist 2 years before. That's going to be the case for at least 2-3 decades, for sure. So these two pillars are going to remain the same two pillars for many decades because, of course, when we reach 97.5% efficiency, they'll get to a point where, you don't get 200% efficiency, right? We'll get to but we can still always improve that. But then we have batteries, energy-intensive batteries. So at the moment, we have 8 to 10% improvement in battery energy density on conventional chemistries, let's say. But at some point, we're going to have solid-state batteries, and we're going to have all sorts of technologies coming that will enable the most amazing racing cars. Because imagine, our Gen 4 car at 600 kilowatt, which is, 800 horsepower. Imagine a car like that is, lighter than Formula One. The performance would be unbelievable. And that's not that far away in the future. So these two pillars are going to remain for sure. There's, it will be a good problem to have when we have no more technology development in electric cars, right? Like we can always make these cars better for the future. Formula One, on the other side, is in an interesting situation because, of course, we know the new regulation 2026 to 2030, the coming up regulations, they have almost parity now between petrol power and electric power. And funny enough, their electric power is the same as what we run now.
I think most people don't know that Formula One cars are all hybrids. They all have electric motors in them because the electric motor gives you an acceleration that an internal combustion engine can't.
So from next year and until 2030, you have this new regulation in Formula One where they will have about 400 kilowatts for the engine and 350 from the electric motor, which is what we run in Formula E today. We will go to 600, so hence the performance. So Formula is almost at parity now, Formula One, between petrol and electric, and that will open up a lot of interesting developments for them. What Formula One does after 2030 is a big debate, because at some point, by 2030 onwards, all the cars that dealerships and what cars that people buy will be electric. For the reason I explained, not necessarily because we love batteries, but it's quite nice to drive a car around that's using 4 times less energy. So it's inevitable. What Formula One becomes then is, not for me to say, there are many ways of going, but of course sustainable fuels come in the discussion, which is really interesting for some applications. And it's funny that Formula One will end up helping develop sustainable fuels, yet the application will mostly be for airlines and other applications, right? But it's fine. It's still development. So it will be really interesting to see where they go from there.
Are you worried about the fact that in the US, you are seeing a backlash against EVs, given how big US audiences are for sport in general and how much they contribute to the sport in financial terms, but also in eyeballs? Formula E is about electric cars. And if one large economy, the largest economy is not that interested in electric cars, does that worry you?
Yes and no. For sure, it's not helpful. There are at the moment headwinds in all sorts of directions. Having said that, I am not worried one bit in the mid-long term. And one of the main indicators simply is we are talking here about large industrial projects, really. So at Envision, we are building many gigafactories to supply cells to car manufacturers and static energy storage for grid, which is highly popular. That's a very interesting discussion for another day. So all these gigafactoring projects, these EV factories, these are 3-5 year projects that you don't change your mind on this project every 2 minutes. So ultimately, all these projects that are ongoing, they will carry on. Will the sales be a bit lower than expected in a year? Possibly, but over 5-10 years. Back to my very earlier point, unless in the next few years we find a technology that is more efficient than a battery electric car, I doubt it. But if that was to happen, that's the only thing that could derail it. Ultimately, the sheer efficiency of electric cars means that this is coming. This is the only way to move people around on the road. The exact timing is a bit complicated because each market has a different demand base and timing and so on. But I'm not worried about it all long term. And actually, interestingly, Formula E, I don't have the exact number. Now you put me on the spot, but I know this year, our race in Mexico and Miami had the highest ever audience in the US by like a long way compared to previous year. So we are growing really, really fast in America. And we have a roadmap of more races in North and South America, as well as growing globally anyway. So we see, close to 20% year-on-year growth anyway in audience. But by adding more races, we are going to accelerate that even further. So, anti-EV sentiment in some parts of the world, frankly, I have seen that since the beginning. Believe me, when I was doing interviews 12, 14 years ago about electric racing, it was 99% anti-EV sentiment, So it is, for me, a lot easier today than it was at the time. But, it comes back to my point. All this will go away once electric cars are better in every single metric. And then ultimately the discussion stops, really. So that's what we are trying to accelerate.
Thank you, Sylvain.
Great to be here.
Final lap of the race. We've had a couple of crashes, some safety cars, lots of overtaking. How's your first experience of Formula E been?
I enjoyed it a lot. It was way more exciting than I thought it would be. And after the predictable start over the first 10 laps, it got super exciting. There you go.
Who's won it?
It's Nick Cassidy.
Thank you for listening to Zero. And now for the sound of the week.
Dopamine.
That is beatboxer Wing performing his song Dopamine. Turns out beatboxing is a competitive sport, and I'm all here for it. If you like this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Share this episode with a friend or with someone who loves Mario Kart. This episode was produced by Oscar Boyd. Our theme music is composed by Wonderly. Special thanks to Envision Racing, Eleanor Harrison Dungate, Somer Sadi, Moses Andim, and Siobhan Wagner. I am Akshat Rathi, back soon.